So this is the clutch side of my SL230 Honda SL230 engine, which is very similar to the CRF230 engine. When I received this engine, it was in parts, and some of the parts on this side of the engine were missing, so I've had to purchase some parts off parts lists. This part here is a spacer that slides onto the shaft. This little collar here on this edge here, I'm wondering whether it's slightly not thick enough, and the clutch basket wasn't spaced out far enough. So I've got this little copper washer here. It's probably just under 1 millimeter in thickness, and that slides onto here. Then my collar goes on, and I notice now that it's just sitting flush where it should be. Before it was sitting just a little bit too far in, so I think it's actually in the right position now with that little spacer there. I also cleaned up the back of the basket here and ground the rivet heads down a little bit. They were sitting quite proud, and polished that up to give myself a bit more clearance, because what was happening is the back of these rivets here, was touching on the clutch actuator plate here, the clutch selector actuator, the clutch selector plate. So I've took a little bit off that as well and polished that up, and I'm hoping that's going to fix the problem. Well, I'm pretty sure it is actually. I only needed a very small space, very small amount of movement there. So everything seems to go back here nice and flush now. So I think we're going to be okay to reassemble. Of course, this has got to go back and behind here first before I do that. I'm just sort of mocking it up a little bit just to show you. Now, I'm not saying that you guys will have this problem, because you're probably going to work with a complete engine. But unfortunately, I got this engine in totally dismantled, and it wasn't until I started to put the engine back together that I realized what parts were missing, and then I had to try to locate them. So I had a lot of trouble around this clutch area. If you look on some of my previous videos, you'll see the trouble I had just down here with the actuator itself. But I believe we're getting close to having this sorted now. These clearances here are correct, like this surface here and that surface there. I put blue tack to make sure they're touching, so they're sitting nicely against the selector shaft. So it's not like the selector shaft is actually moving backwards and forwards to allow the plate here to come forward and start to catch on the back of the basket here. So I think everything there was nice and firm. I think it was just a clearance issue on the back of the basket with these rivets, and the fact that maybe that collar is slightly thinner than what it should be. You know, when these engines are built, there's probably little tolerances and little things that happen on the production line where they slide this in or slide that out. You know, you can't be sure. This goes back to the 90s as well. So there's a small update on this engine. I'll get it boxed up over the next day and rerun it. It ran beautifully. The only problem was the metallic sound that I was getting from the back of this basket here, just touching on the surface of this here with the rivets, making quite a disturbing metallic sound. The only problem is, of course, every time you take this apart, you've got to drain the oil out, you've got to muck around with the clutch plates, etc. Anyway, that's what it's all about on these old engines. Thank you very much for viewing, and I hope the progress of this bike is of interest to you, and I'm hoping before too long to be able to show you some videos of me riding around on it. Catch you a little bit later on.